She was homeless and forgotten until a billionaire offered her a fortune to carry his child. But as her belly grew, so did an unexpected bond. What she uncovered about him will leave you stunned. Hello, family. Welcome to Tales Haven. I hope you find my story videos interesting and engaging. Kindly subscribe to my channel for more stories. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Autumn was cold in Chicago, colder than Hannah Brooks could ever remember. She pulled her thin brown coat tighter around her shoulders and sat quietly on a worn wooden bench in front of a little bakery. The warm smell of fresh bread floated out every time someone opened the door. But Hannah didn't have even $1 to buy a roll. She tried not to think about how hungry she was. Instead, she watched people hurry by with their shopping bags and steaming coffee cups. No one looked at her. No one ever did. She was just another homeless woman blending into the street. Her fingers were numb from the icy wind. She rubbed her hands together and thought about her mother. If her mother were alive, she would never have let her end up like this. Hannah felt a sharp ache in her chest. She had once been a hopeful young woman with dreams of teaching children. But life had fallen apart so fast, her mother's sudden death, losing her job as a teacher's aide, and then her tiny apartment. One by one, everything she cared about slipped through her fingers. Now, she lived under a bridge with a few blankets and a plastic bag of clothes. Some nights, she cried herself to sleep, wishing anyone, would see that she was still a person inside. She was lost in thought when she noticed a sleek black car slowing down in front of her. It was long and polished, the kind of car important people drove. Hannah looked away quickly, embarrassed. She didn't want anyone thinking she was begging. But the car didn't keep going. It stopped. The back door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He was dressed in a long dark gray overcoat, and his shiny black shoes clicked on the sidewalk. He looked around as if he was searching for someone. When his eyes fell on Hannah, she felt her heart jump. She tried to shrink back against the bench, hoping he would realize he was mistaken. Instead, he walked calmly toward her. Up close, she saw he had sharp blue eyes, neatly combed black hair, and a clean-shaven face. He looked powerful and sure of himself, the kind of man who never worried about anything. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a deep, even voice. "May I sit down?" Hannah blinked. No one had ever asked to sit next to her before. She looked around, half thinking he was talking to someone else. "Are you speaking to me?" she asked carefully. He nodded and lowered himself onto the bench. He didn't seem afraid of her or disgusted by her ragged coat. "My name is Graham Porter," he said, his eyes watching her closely. She cleared her throat, unsure what to say. "I'm Hannah." "I know," he replied softly. "I've seen you here before." Hannah felt her stomach twist. Why had this rich stranger been watching her? "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would a man like you come to speak to me?" Graham didn't smile, but there was something gentle in the way he looked at her. "Because I have something important to ask you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a white envelope. He held it out to her with a steady hand. Hannah stared at it, her heart beating hard. Her hands were shaking when she finally took it and opened the flap. Inside was a cashier's check with her name written across the top. Her breath caught when she saw the amount, $250,000. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "What is this?" she managed to say. "A chance," Graham said softly. "A chance to change your life." Hannah looked up, confused and frightened. I don't understand." He folded his hands together in his lap. "I want you to consider becoming a surrogate mother. I want you to carry my child." Her whole body felt frozen. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Graham took a careful breath. "I know this must sound strange, but I've done my homework. I could hire someone else, but I don't want to. I want someone who knows struggle. Someone who has a good heart." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Why me?" "Because you have nothing left to lose," he said quietly, "and everything to gain." She looked back down at the check. The numbers blurred through her tears. "You don't have to decide now," Graham said gently. "I'll come back tomorrow morning. Think about it. That's all I ask." He stood up and buttoned his coat. As he walked away, she felt a strange emptiness settle in her chest, mixed with a small, bright spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. The car pulled away and disappeared down the street, leaving her alone again with the envelope in her lap. The bakery door opened behind her, sending another wave of warm bread scent into the cold air. But Hannah barely noticed. All she could do was stare at the check, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities she never dreamed she'd have. Hannah sat on the bench long after the car disappeared. The check felt heavy in her hands, as if it might melt into air if she looked away. All around her, people hurried by. No one knew she was holding a piece of paper that could change everything. She wiped her eyes and folded the check carefully, slipping it into the pocket of her coat. Then she stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak, like she had run a long race. She walked to the small alley behind the bakery, where she kept her things hidden under a tarp. She crawled under the plastic and wrapped herself in her blankets. The air smelled of cold stones and old bread. She took out the envelope again and held it under the dim glow of the street lamp that shone through a crack in the tarp. A chance to change your life. Graham's words echoed in her head. Her heart thumped hard as she imagined it. A warm apartment, clean clothes, good food. No more nights in the freezing wind. No more hunger. But then she thought of the other part, having a baby, carrying a child that wouldn't be hers to keep. Tears filled her eyes again. She pressed her palm to her mouth to keep from sobbing too loudly. All night, she lay awake, watching the stars move across the narrow strip of sky above the alley. She thought about her mother's smile, about the little classroom where she used to help kids learn their letters. What would Mom tell me to do? In the early hours, she finally drifted into a restless sleep. When she woke, the cold had grown sharper, biting her cheeks and fingers. Her body felt stiff, but her mind was clearer than it had been in a long time. Hannah knew she had to decide. She couldn't keep drifting through life, hoping something would change. She gathered her blankets and clothes into her bag and walked back toward the bench. She sat down and waited. Her stomach turned every time a car passed, but none of them were Graham's. Part of her wished he wouldn't come back so she wouldn't have to choose. But just before 9 o'clock, she saw the black car pull up to the curb. Her heart started pounding again. The door opened, and Graham stepped out. He looked exactly as he had the day before, calm, put together, and completely certain of himself. He walked toward her and paused, his eyes searching her face. "Good morning, Hannah," he said in a voice that was somehow both warm and serious. "Morning," she whispered, her mouth dry. "May I sit?" She nodded, and he sat down beside her, folding his hands in his lap. "I don't want you to feel pressured," he said quietly. "Whatever you decide, you'll be treated with respect." Hannah looked down at her worn shoes. She had never felt so small, so unsure. "I have questions," she said softly. "Of course," Graham replied. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice cracking. "Out of everyone, why did you pick me?" Graham sighed and rubbed his thumb along his palm, as if he was trying to smooth away a memory. "I've watched you for a while," he said finally. "I've seen how you give your sandwich to the old man with the dog. I've seen you share your blanket with a mother and her child." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "You don't know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Graham said, his blue eyes steady. "I know you have a good heart, and that matters more to me than anything else." Hannah swallowed, her eyes filling again. "What happens if I say yes?" she asked, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. "You will come with me," Graham said gently. "I will give you a safe place to stay. You will have doctors to make sure you and the baby are healthy. You will never go without. And when the baby is born?" Graham's jaw tightened just a little. "The child will be raised by me." How will I get to see them?" she asked, feeling her heart twist. "That would be discussed later," he said carefully. "But you would be well cared for, Hannah. You would have the chance to start over." She looked down at her hands, pale and cold. For so long, she had dreamed of something, anything, that would take her away from this life. But she never imagined it would come like this. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I understand," Graham said, his tone gentle. I would be, too. She closed her eyes, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. Then she took a slow breath and lifted her gaze to his. All right, she said quietly. I'll do it. For a moment, she thought she saw relief cross his face. He nodded once, slowly, as if he was carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. Thank you, he said. He stood and reached for his phone. A moment later, the car door opened, and a woman with kind brown eyes stepped out. This is Eleanor, Graham said, gesturing to her. She will help you get settled. Eleanor smiled and held out her hand. It's nice to meet you, Hannah. Hannah stood up, her legs still trembling. She took Eleanor's hand and let her guide her to the waiting car. As she climbed inside, she looked back once at the bench where she had spent so many lonely nights. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was leaving something behind and stepping into something she didn't understand but knew could change her life forever. The car door closed with a soft click, shutting out the cold wind and the noise of the street. Hannah felt her heart thumping as she sank into the warm leather seat. The inside of the car smelled faintly of fresh linen and something sweet she couldn't name. Eleanor sat beside her and gave her a small, comforting smile. You're very brave, she said softly. Hannah looked down at her hands, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. I don't feel brave, she whispered. Eleanor reached over and patted her arm. That's usually when you are. The driver started the engine, and the car pulled away from the curb. Hannah didn't look back at the bench. She had already said goodbye in her heart. They drove through busy streets that slowly turned into quieter neighborhoods. The tall buildings gave way to old brick houses and then to wide lanes lined with big trees. The farther they went, the more Hannah felt like she was leaving her old life behind. After nearly 30 minutes, the car turned onto a long driveway made of smooth stones. At the end stood a large house, more like a mansion really. Its white walls glowed under the early afternoon light, and tall windows looked out over a wide, frozen lake. Hannah felt her throat tighten. She had never even been near a house like this before. The car stopped near the front steps. Graham was already standing by the door, his coat buttoned neatly, his expression calm. When the door opened, Hannah hesitated. Her legs felt like they wouldn't hold her up. Eleanor stepped out first and turned back, holding out her hand. Come on, dear. You're safe now. Hannah took her hand and climbed out slowly. The cold air bit her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Everything around her felt too big, too clean, too far from the world she knew. Graham nodded once in greeting. Welcome to your new home, he said. Hannah swallowed, unsure how to reply. It didn't feel like her home. It felt like she had stepped onto a movie set. Eleanor led her inside. The front hall was wide and bright, with polished floors and a tall staircase that curved up to the second floor. A large chandelier hung overhead, glittering like 1,000 tiny stars. Let me show you your room, Eleanor said gently. They walked down a long hallway until they reached a door painted a soft cream color. Eleanor opened it and stepped aside so Hannah could go in first. The room was bigger than the whole apartment she had lost. A large bed covered in a white quilt stood against one wall. There was a soft rug on the floor, a wooden dresser, and a window looking out over the lake. Hannah set her bag of clothes by the door and walked slowly to the bed. She touched the blanket, feeling the softness under her fingers. This is yours now, Eleanor said. You can rest as long as you need. I don't know what to say, Hannah whispered. You don't have to say anything, Eleanor replied kindly. A quiet knock sounded at the door, and Graham stepped in. He stayed near the threshold, as if he didn't want to crowd her. Eleanor will help you with anything you need, he said. You will also meet Dr. Patel later today. She's the physician who will look after you. Hannah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. There's no rush, he continued. Eat, rest, and get comfortable. Tomorrow, we will discuss the next steps. He started to leave but paused, his hand on the door frame. And Hannah, if you have any questions, you can always ask me. For a moment, she thought she saw something soft in his eyes, something that made her chest ache. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded and left, closing the door gently behind him. Eleanor showed her where extra clothes were kept, a neat row of soft sweaters, leggings, and warm socks. She even laid out a pale blue robe and slippers. "Do you feel like eating?" Eleanor asked. Hannah realized her stomach was tight with hunger. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll bring you some soup," Eleanor replied. "You settle in." When she was alone again, Hannah walked to the window. The lake was covered in a thin layer of ice, and the trees along the shore were bare. It was quiet in a way she wasn't used to. No sirens, no shouting, no car horns. She turned and looked around the room. It was warm and safe, but it didn't feel like hers yet. On the dresser sat a small photo frame. She walked over and picked it up. Inside was a picture of a woman with dark hair and a kind smile. She looked nothing like Hannah, but something about her eyes felt familiar. She turned the frame over. A name was written on the back in neat letters: Lillian Porter. His wife, Hannah thought. The woman he lost. She set the picture back down carefully, her heart beating faster. A soft knock announced Eleanor's return with a tray. A bowl of chicken soup, fresh bread, and a glass of milk. "Eat," Eleanor said gently. "You need your strength." Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and took a sip of soup. Warmth spread through her cold body, and for the first time in months, she felt something like peace. But as she looked again at the photo of Lillian, she felt something else, too: curiosity and a prickle of fear. Because she was starting to understand that Graham Porter had secrets, and she was now part of them. Hannah finished her soup slowly, feeling the warmth in her belly spread to the cold corners of her heart. When she was done, Eleanor took the tray with a gentle smile and promised to check on her later. Left alone again, Hannah lay back on the soft pillows. Her eyes felt heavy, but her mind wouldn't rest. She kept thinking about the woman in the photo frame, Lillian Porter. The woman whose memory still filled this house. What would she think of me being here? Hannah wondered. The thought made her chest ache. Eventually, sleep took over, pulling her down into the first deep rest she'd had in weeks. When she woke, pale afternoon light was spilling across the quilt. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she turned her head and saw the tall window looking out over the frozen lake, and she remembered everything. There was a quiet knock, and a woman in a gray cardigan stepped inside, carrying a small black bag. She had kind brown eyes behind thin glasses. "Hello, Hannah," she said warmly. "I'm Dr. Patel. May I come in?" Hannah sat up quickly, her hair mussed from sleep. "Yes, of course." Dr. Patel set her bag on the dresser and pulled up a chair. "I'll be your doctor while you're here," she explained. "I'd like to do a quick checkup today, if that's all right with you." Hannah nodded, her heart fluttering nervously. The exam was gentle and professional. Dr. Patel asked about her health, her cycle, and whether she'd ever been pregnant before. Hannah answered everything honestly. When it was done, Dr. Patel smiled and patted her hand. "You're in good health," she said. "Tomorrow we'll begin the next steps. For now, just rest and eat well." After the doctor left, Eleanor brought dinner: a plate of roasted chicken, soft rolls, and steamed vegetables. Hannah ate every bite. It felt strange to be cared for so tenderly, like she was someone important. That night, she lay in the dark listening to the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. She wondered if Graham was awake somewhere in the house, thinking about Lillian. Or maybe about me, she thought, her stomach twisting. In the morning, she dressed in one of the soft sweaters Eleanor had left in the wardrobe. She brushed her hair until it lay smooth against her shoulders. When she opened the door, she nearly bumped into Graham. He stood in the hallway, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Good morning," he said, looking slightly surprised. "I was just about to knock." Hannah took a step back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "No, it's fine." He offered her a mug. "Eleanor says you like tea more than coffee, so I had the kitchen prepare this." She accepted it, her hands wrapping around the warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. For a moment, they stood in the hall, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Graham nodded toward the end of the corridor. "Would you join me in the library?" he asked. Hannah followed him slowly. The library was a large room lined with tall shelves full of books. In the corner, two leather chairs sat near a fireplace. Graham gestured for her to sit. He took the chair across from hers. "I thought it would be good for us to talk," he began, his voice measured but not cold. "I want you to feel comfortable here." Hannah stared into her tea. I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't really understand why you're being so kind." Graham was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "My late wife, Lillian, was the kindest person I ever knew," he said. "She couldn't have children. We tried for years." He swallowed hard, and Hannah saw his fingers tighten around his mug. "She always said that if something ever happened to her, she wanted me to find a way to have a family, to remember her through the child we never had." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Graham looked up at her. "I didn't want this to feel like a transaction. That's why I wanted someone who had a good heart." She met his gaze, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. She felt something unspoken pass between them, something she didn't quite understand yet. After a long moment, he cleared his throat and set his mug down. "Would you like to see the rest of the house?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly. They walked together through wide hallways and bright rooms. Graham showed her the sunroom with its tall windows and the kitchen that smelled of fresh bread. He paused at a door with a soft blue paint. "This will be the nursery," he said, opening it. Hannah stepped inside slowly. The room was empty except for a rocking chair and a small table. But she could picture it: crib, toys, little clothes folded neatly in drawers. "Have you thought of names?" she asked before she could stop herself. Graham looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe even fear. "No," he said softly. "Not yet." They stood together in the quiet room, and Hannah felt her heart beating fast again. This wasn't just a job. It was something bigger, something that scared her almost as much as it warmed her. Later that night, she lay in bed, watching the snow start to fall outside the window. She thought of Graham's face when he talked about Lillian. She thought of the empty nursery and how, somehow, she had become part of this man's plan to heal old wounds. And though she knew she should be careful, she felt her heart slowly opening to the idea that she was no longer alone. By morning, the mansion was quiet and bright. The sun made the snow look like a field of diamonds. Hannah got dressed in a soft gray sweater and warm leggings Eleanor had set out. When she stepped into the hallway, she saw Graham talking quietly with Dr. Patel. They both looked up when she approached. "Good morning," Dr. Patel greeted with her usual kind smile. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Hannah admitted, touching her stomach without thinking. "Stronger." "That's good," Dr. Patel said. "Today, we'll start the medical process. Are you ready?" Hannah took a steadying breath. She nodded. Graham looked at her carefully. "I'll be here if you need anything." She searched his face for any sign of doubt, but found only calm and something gentler, something almost like hope. Dr. Patel led her to a room on the first floor. It was warm and smelled faintly of fresh flowers. A nurse was waiting, arranging instruments and paperwork. Over the next few hours, they explained every detail to her: how the procedure would work, how they would monitor her health, and what she should expect in the coming weeks. Hannah asked questions when she didn't understand. No one rushed her. No one treated her like she was less than. When everything was ready, she lay back on the exam table, her heart thudding in her chest. This is it, she thought. No turning back now. Dr. Patel spoke to her in a calm, reassuring voice the entire time. The procedure was quick, and though she felt nervous, it didn't hurt much. Afterward, she rested in a small recovery room. Eleanor brought her tea and a plate of buttered toast. "You did so well," Eleanor said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Hannah's forehead. Tears stung Hannah's eyes. "Thank you for being here." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "You are stronger than you know." Later that evening, Graham knocked on her door. He stood in the doorway, his expression careful, as if he didn't want to intrude. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Hannah said, her voice hoarse from emotion. He stepped inside and sat in the chair near her bed. "I wanted to thank you," he said, folding his hands together. I know this isn't easy. Hannah looked down at her blanket, her heart heavy and full at the same time. I'm scared, she admitted. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. I am too. For a while, they sat without speaking. Snow still fell outside, soft and silent. Graham, she began hesitantly. What happens after the baby is born? What happens to me? He looked up and she thought she saw something flicker across his face, something like guilt. You'll be free to leave, he said carefully. You'll have the money to start over. You could do anything you want. And will I ever see the child? She whispered. He closed his eyes for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. That's something we would have to discuss later. Her chest ached at the thought, but she nodded. She had agreed to this. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept picturing the baby she would one day carry in her arms, and then hand over. But as the days passed, her body began to change. She felt tired often. Her appetite returned, stronger than before. Every morning, she woke to Eleanor bringing warm oatmeal and fruit. She started spending time in the nursery, even though it was still empty. She would sit in the rocking chair and imagine what it would look like filled with little clothes and toys. One afternoon, as snow piled high against the windows, Graham knocked on the nursery door. Hannah looked up in surprise. I didn't think you'd come in here. He stepped inside slowly, his hands in his pockets. I come in here sometimes. To remember. He stood by the window, his gaze far away. This was supposed to be our daughter's room, he said softly. Lillian picked the pink color. Hannah felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say, so she simply sat quietly. After a while, he turned to her. I want you to know I don't see you as just someone carrying my child. You matter. You always will. Her eyes blurred with tears. Thank you, she whispered. That night, she lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the old glass. She felt something growing inside her, more than a baby. It was a feeling she hadn't dared to let herself believe in for years. Belonging. Weeks passed. One morning, Dr. Patel arrived with papers and a thoughtful look. Hannah, she said gently, we received the final genetic screenings. Hannah's heart jumped. Is something wrong? Dr. Patel hesitated.
No.
Not wrong. But there is something you should know. She handed over a printed page. Hannah scanned it, her eyes jumping over lines of medical terms she didn't understand, until she reached one line that made her breath catch. Her voice trembled. Lillian was my half-sister? Graham stood behind Dr. Patel, his face pale. I didn't know how to tell you, he said, his voice low. I didn't find out until the tests came back. Your mother and Lillian's father. Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth. Family. All this time, she had been carrying a part of her own family and hadn't known. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She looked up at Graham, who looked as lost as she felt. Maybe this was meant to be, she whispered. Graham nodded, his eyes shining with emotion. Maybe it was. In that moment, as snow drifted past the nursery window, Hannah realized her life would never be the same. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Hannah sat very still in the nursery, the paper with the test results trembling in her hand. Family. The word felt too big to hold in her heart all at once. Graham stood nearby, silent, watching her face, as if he was afraid she would disappear. Finally, she looked up at him, tears spilling freely. You knew for weeks, she whispered. I did, he admitted, his voice raw. I was going to tell you sooner, but I didn't know how. I didn't want you to feel trapped. Hannah set the paper on the rocking chair and took a shaky breath. Why didn't you just find someone else? Graham walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. Because I didn't want someone else, he said simply. Not after I met you. Her throat tightened. She thought back to the first day she had seen him, stepping out of that black car like someone from another world. And now she knew somehow they had always been connected. Dr. Patel quietly slipped out of the room, giving them space. Hannah pressed a hand to her belly, where life was already growing. So, what does this mean for us? Graham looked at her with a softness that almost broke her heart. It means you're not alone. It means that no matter what happens, You will always have a place here. He took another step, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I can't pretend I don't care about you. I do. More than I ever thought I would. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought he might hear it. I care about you too, she whispered. Something changed in his face, a quiet release, like he had been carrying a heavy burden and finally set it down. He held out his hand, waiting. Hannah looked at it for a moment, then placed her own in his. And for the first time in years, she felt safe. Spring came at last, softening the cold edges of winter. Hannah's belly grew rounder each week. Eleanor and Dr. Patel fussed over her like gentle mothers. Graham became a quiet, steady presence at her side. In the evenings, they often sat together in the library or took slow walks around the garden. They talked about Lillian, about her kindness, her dreams. But more and more, they talked about the future. One afternoon, as the cherry trees began to blossom, Graham surprised her with a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny heart charm. It was Lillian's, he said softly. She wanted it to go to her daughter. But now, it feels like it should be yours. Hannah's eyes blurred with tears. She fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling the cool metal against her skin. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. Graham touched her cheek gently. I want this child to know where she came from, that she is loved by everyone who came before her. Hannah nodded.
She will.
Summer arrived the day Hannah went into labor. Graham never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, and whispered words that kept her strong when she thought she would break. And then, at last, the world stilled, just for a moment, and the cry of their daughter filled the room. Hannah sobbed as the nurse laid the tiny, wriggling baby against her chest. Graham leaned over and kissed their daughter's damp head, tears in his eyes. She's beautiful, he whispered. Hannah looked up at him. We did this, she said, smiling through her tears. Yes, he said, brushing her hair back. Together. 2 days later, Hannah sat in the nursery rocking her daughter. Graham came in quietly and stood watching them, hands in his pockets. You look like you belong here, he said softly. She looked up at him, feeling her heart open wider than she ever thought possible. I feel like I do. He took a slow breath. I know this started as an arrangement, but it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Not to me.
She swallowed hard. Me neither. Graham crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. I don't want you to leave, he said, his voice steady. I don't want this to be the end. Her eyes filled again. I don't either, she whispered. Very carefully, he reached for her hand and pressed it over his heart. I'm asking you to stay, he said, voice low. Not because of duty or the past, but because I've fallen in love with you. Hannah's heart lifted into her throat. I love you too, she said, her voice breaking. Graham smiled then, the first true, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. In that moment, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. She looked down at the tiny life in her arms, at the man beside her, and felt peace settle in her bones. A life once broken had become something whole, something beautiful, something she could finally call her own. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, kindly subscribe to my channel for more stories, like, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. You can also comment what you feel about the story. Thanks for watching.